All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking your time to join us for this workshop. As was mentioned, my name is Christina Schwobel, and I'm going to be talking about different PowerPoint tools and techniques that will hopefully be helpful for all of you. So basically, I'm just one of the librarians at the Thomas Cooper Library. It's a brief introduction, and I'm really interested in making sure people have access to a lot of the different resources that are available, which is why I was interested in doing this session. I'm fairly easy to locate, so if you do have any follow-up questions after this session, please don't hesitate to contact me directly or come to one of my other presentations. All right. So I am going to be covering a fair amount of topics for the workshop. So we're going to look a little bit about design. Then we're going to look at how to customize your own templates, using transitions and animations, how to add your own audio and video, and then also how to create a video from scratch. So again, if you have any questions as we go along, just let me know, and we'll go ahead and get started then with design. So design is a really important feature when you are thinking of PowerPoint workshops, and it can really have an effect on how people are going to see your presentation. So here's going to be a few different tricks that you can use or things to think of when you're working with design. The first is you don't want to let the slides suck up all the attention, right? You should be the star of the show, and it should not necessarily be your presentation. I'm going to move away from that because that can give people a little bit of sense of vertigo. All right. The next thing is, remember, you do not want walls of text, right? The slides are meant to support the narration of the speaker, and they should not make the speaker superfluous. Now, except in specific instances, the presentation should not be able to be given without you present. So handouts can be created to accompany slides as takeaways, where you can prepare written documentations to highlight your content from the presentation and expand on that content. So you want to make sure you're not including huge walls of text. You also want to limit the number of bullet points. So again, the slides should highlight points and details that you're sharing, and you don't want to have 20, 30 bullet points on a page. A really good technique is to think about showing versus telling. So instead of having different bullet points talking about percentages, you can instead show that information. Now, it is important at the same time to not overwhelm your audience with data. So if you have too many charts, graphs, and data sets on a single slide, that can actually work against you. So you want to kind of think out the layout, think of how much information are you conveying at a time, and make sure it's something that's easily readable and the amount of time you're going to allocate for that slide. When in doubt, you can always dedicate one slide for each graph or chart for every set of data. So this is not just easier on your audience in terms of absorbing information, but it also lets each set of data make the maximum impact. Because if you have too much information on a slide, then nothing's going to be that important. So it's going to be really hard to make something stand out. Now, you can also insert a lot of different materials into slides. So they have everything from graphs, relational diagrams, equations using the e-ink options, and you also have different accent options. So you have add-ins that you can do, like Poll Everywhere, and then you can also add icons or other visual cues that students can use throughout the presentation. So you can see little examples of some icons, some charts that we have, and some different resources that are added. All right. You also have where you can add things such as forms. And this would allow anyone with access to the slides to submit answers. Now, I will mention the forms will not work if you're doing something like I am and you're sharing the screen. This would need to be shared where you're just sharing the slides within like a class or other things like that. But you can go ahead and add forms, which is kind of nice to just get some feedback on who's actually looking at things, what kind of things they're seeing, other things like that. So if you go underneath Insert, this is where a lot of the things that I was talking about are available. So you can insert things like the charts, the forms are available if you want to insert some icons. And for those of you who are wanting to add equations, those are going to be something that is really useful to then do if you go under equations. You can do an ink equation, and this is where you can actually write it in with my really terrible mouse handwriting. Yes, Patty.
How do you add the poll anywhere, please?
The poll everywhere. So for that one, you're going to need to go underneath File, and then you're going to need to go into Options. And there's actually different add-ins that you can do. So there's a bunch of different add-ins that you can look for. And then those are kind of the different things that you can do for like the PowerPoint add-ins. If you're wanting to insert a quiz, you can go underneath Insert and Forms. And then this is going to have where it's linked with my account so that I can just create a new form or a new quiz, or I can add any forms that I've previously created. And then this is going to allow me to then open that within Microsoft Forms and create it from there. No, great questions. All right, so you might need to update. And then the other thing is, are you using the downloaded version of PowerPoint or using the online version within the browser? Downloaded? Okay, so it should have it. It just might just need an update. You might also need to look then at, it might need to be in an add-ins. So if it's not appearing on there, the other thing too is they might have had it turned off with your administrator, or you might need to go through the add-ins again. Yes, you can check with your IT person and see if there is a method to add it through your options. So again, if you go through the options in the Trust Center, you might need to change that, or if you go through the add-ins. Yeah, so it might be permissions, possibly, depending on the version you're using or the computer you're using. So one of the great things with technology is there's a lot that can go right, but there's also a lot that can go wrong. So sometimes it takes a little bit of playing with it. For deleting the forms, you can just go ahead and either just move it off, or you can just delete the slide it's on. So like if I added a form here, I can just insert that one. And then there's also going to be a little icon there. So you can go ahead and delete it from there. Yes, poll is in the add-ins. There's a poll everywhere option that's available. Deleting the forms in my form, you would want to go to the Microsoft Forms page. So if I go to new form, so if you go to forms.office.com and log in through there, or if you go through the 365 app, there should have an option for forms. And then once you're in there, you can go just to all your forms and delete them or clean them up from there. You can see I have a lot of untitled forms because I just never deleted them. But you can change them, edit them, do whatever you want to from there. Now the other thing too is, as was mentioned, you don't want to overfill. So you do want to mark what the most important concept is. You don't want to bury the lead. So the most important concept is going to be the moment where your audience understands that they've arrived at the core of your idea. And so it's good to make sure that you're kind of marking this information, and this could be, you know, a little bit after the halfway point, or around the halfway point, or closer to the end if you want. But the idea is you want to have where you're kind of building up to some main points sometimes, and then have something that you really want that to illustrate as being most important. Now, this is going to indicate the beginning of the end, so to speak, for the presentation. And then the other thing to remember with this is don't remain on the stage too long after your main point is done. So you don't want to sit there after you've talked about your most important things and then go for another hour or two, because that can, again, make them forget what you're really wanting them to remember. All right. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is color selection. So there's some really interesting things that you can do with color selection within PowerPoint, and then you can also edit pictures afterwards using the filters. So PowerPoint has some really strong filter options and different color options that you can do. So you can really try to make your slides cohesive if you'd like. You also want to make sure that as you're looking at things, you're picking high quality pictures. You don't want to have ones that are really blurry or hard to see. You want pictures that really stand out and can kind of help illustrate your points. Now, images should be used to lead the eye where you want it to go and augment and enhance your presentation. You do want to make sure that images fit and you're not just using them for the sake of adding images. At the same time, you also want to make sure you're not adding too many images into a single slide. All right, so since we're talking about images, let's go ahead and add an image. So these three are just a good example of different open source copyright or Creative Commons images where you can go ahead and use them without having to worry about licensing or copyright. So these are just ones that I've used frequently, and I recommend to students or faculty because they normally have some really great materials that you can use. I'm just going to add a cat. And then once you've added a picture, you can play with it. If you click on the image, you'll see a picture format option. And this is where you're going to have those color options. You can change color saturation. You can set transparencies under transparency if you want to. You can change and make some corrections to the color. You can make it look really freaky if you want. You can also do things like removing the background. So if you click on remove background, it'll automatically try to filter out the background information. And then you can draw in extra areas of what pieces you'd like to keep. And so if I wanted to, I can remove most of the background, and then I just have that little cat that I can move wherever I want. I will mention if you have things like with fur or hair, it is hard to remove the background. Or if you have a lot of colors that are very close together, it will be difficult to move background, but it's not impossible. The other thing you can also play with is the design options. So when you're looking at the slides, as soon as you add an image, you normally should have the design options pop open. And this is just suggesting some different options you can do with that image and with the text squares that you have available in your slide. Wonderful. Yeah. So Christina, once you click on the image, and it should then highlight the box around it. If you go under picture format, that would let you then play with all the different picture tools you can do within some of those options. Okay, so picture format is going to be, once you've clicked on the image itself, it's going to be at the upper top area. It'll just show up at the very end underneath the search bar. So it'll only appear when you have the picture selected. So if I click the text box, you'll see a shape format. So whatever you're clicking, that's what you're going to be able to edit. Wonderful. Yeah, and you can do all kinds of really neat things when you're playing with the color settings. So here's just one image that I adjusted with different color filters and different options. So you can really set the tone different for your presentation. Again, you can use transparency options. So if you find a great picture, you can make sure that it's not going to stand out too much and overwhelm your message. So if you want, you can reduce transparency on things, or again, you can change the saturation levels or the color levels, make it sepia, grayscale, things like that. So you really have a lot of power when you're working within PowerPoint to really kind of customize it to make it really fit the mood that you're trying to go for, and then also to make sure that you're not having where you're using too many different types of colors, because it'd be where it's not very cohesive and you're all over the place, which some of my slides are, just to show examples of maybe what not to do. So I have a lot of different variants going. So you want to make sure you do try to make it a little bit more cohesive and have it all tied together. You also want to think, in addition to the colors, you also want to think about the text that you're using. So you want to think about what kind of typography are you using. You want to think about how legible it is. You can have amazing different typography that really fits your themes, but if you can't read it, it's not going to do anyone any good. And you also want to think how appropriate it is. So for instance, some of these ones here on the bottom may not be really great if you're doing a professional association presentation. So think about, who your audience is when you're presenting for this, and again, how appropriate that message might be using certain types of typography. The other thing with legibility is, especially if you are using a bunch of different colors and backgrounds and things like that, I like recommending to do like a squint test or just a double check to make sure you can still read the text when it's used with the different backgrounds or other images or things that you're working with. And sometimes you can go ahead and fix this by adding in outlines around the text or doing other things like that, or adding little image boxes that are like a white with a low transparency in there. So you can do different techniques to try to influence this a little bit, but you do want to make sure that all your text is easily read and again is appropriate for the typography. You also can imitate some of the different core design principles. So these are ones that are called core design principles for a reason. They've been around for a while, and they can just kind of help make your life a little bit easier. So a lot of these are designed in the same way that you can use them in other areas of visual communication. So these are 4 different kind of high-level rules that you can use. So there's contrast, which is looking at elements on your slide that are different and making sure that they appear distinct from each other. So a lot of them you want to have good contrasting backgrounds. So this can be used for color and also differentiating the shapes and sizes of the element. You can also use repetition, which is the one here in the middle. And that's using repetition to create a visual uniformity that ties your PowerPoint designs together. So again, that consistency can really make designs appealing. And so that's something that you can use where you're repeating things. Just like I'm repeating the use of that icon to indicate that it's time for you guys to do something. Alignment's really important because you want to make sure that you're trying to balance things and have it like it's in the right place. So the position of each element and how it corresponds to each other can be really important. Yes, so if you are doing something for certain PowerPoints, you might be required to use the standard fonts for the products. That is correct. And that's a great point, Heidi. Yeah, so if it's official or the standard fonts, you can definitely use that. It would just be for if you're doing presentations for other things or just even maybe some non-standard works or just preparing for some classes or some of that other stuff. But it is good to look at the standard fonts. All right. So alignment is just making sure that it looks proper and that things are just lined up and correspond to each other. And then the last of the elements is proximity. And this is just showing that elements that are related to each other should naturally be placed closer to one another. So this way your audience can really easily follow and correlate information while eliminating any ambiguity. So that way, if it's something that should be placed together, you want that information that corresponds to each other placed closely, and then different information can be placed separately or again in different slides, just to make sure that people kind of know how to intuitively figure out what part goes with what. All right, we're going to look then at customizing templates. So the nice thing is there's a lot of different templates that are available pre-made for PowerPoint. And there's a ton of them additionally that are created online that you can get for free. But the nice thing is you can take any of those ones and you can actually make your own template to customize it to exactly what you want. So we're going to open up View from the toolbar. And you're going to select Slide Master. And then you can either select an existing theme to edit, or you can just start creating your own. So for things you can change for here, you can change backgrounds, you can change fonts, colors, the placement of text boxes, headers and footers. So you really have kind of where you can change anything you want to doing this. So again, if you click on View up at the top, and then underneath where it says Slide Master, and then this is the one that we're going to edit. So if you wanted to do a pre-made one, you would click on where it says Themes, and then this will allow you to edit any of those pre-made themes that are available from PowerPoint. So if I wanted to, I have this style, which this is in orange. We can't have orange, right? We need to edit the colors for that. So I can go into colors and I can change this instead to red violet. I can make it slip screen. So you have a bunch of pre-made colors that are available. So if I wanted to, I could do it in greens. And then you can see that's edited that option for every single slide then that you're working on. The other thing that's good to remember with Slide Master is if you create with the top slide, this is going to edit all the other ones that are down below. So the top main slide is editing for all the master title slides and information. And then all the lower ones are editing the individual slide types. So where you might have just a blank, just a title, when you're comparing, things like that. So these are all those different layout options that you have available. So you can change things at the main level, which is going to drop down. So if I change the font here, that's going to then trickle down to every single one lower. So you'll see here, if any of them have a second level, it's automatically changed. Whereas if I change it at this level, it's not going to trickle up. So you can see that's just changing it on that individual level there. So you have a lot of different options that you can do where you can play around with. This is really good too if you wanted to make some branded slides for UFC. If you wanted to go ahead and make some class-specific slides. So if you're doing like an astronomy class, you can customize a template just for all your astronomy classes, or whatever type of class that you are teaching. You can go ahead and just make one so that way your slides will be universal for the entire course. So it's really easy to go through and change that using the Slide Master and just kind of make it your own. You can also do things like adding in backgrounds if you wanted to. So under background styles, you can do that as well. And I can change backgrounds or format it myself if you want to get really finicky. Yes, you can move and delete text boxes. So if you want to have your, let's say the layout that always has a title and then a secondary box, I can actually move that. I can put it over here and be weird and have it always be in that position. I probably wouldn't recommend doing that because that's not a really good place for it. But you can move text boxes wherever you want. You can also say that maybe you always want extra spacing between some of your lists or your hierarchies. So you can do that. You can also insert or create your own layout. So if you wanted to insert a layout, you can start another layout box, and then you can do whatever you want with that layout style. So that way you can essentially create your own layout that doesn't have to be based off of all those previously created layout styles. So if you do have one where you need it to be really wonky and all over the place, you can do that as much as you want to. So for background, again, you can go based off the background styles they have. You can also go on the right with format background. All right, so you can do like a pattern fill. So if I wanted to, I could do like the old Microsoft Paint pattern fills. You can add in your own picture. So you just choose an insert picture that you would want to. And they do have ones that are preloaded. So they have some stock images that you can grab that are already done. I'm just going to insert that one because it's pretty. Exactly, yes. So once you've done this, and I'm just going to change the transparency on this because that's a little too busy. So I can apply that background to all of them or just one or two. And then when you go to save it, it's going to be available then. So I'd close that master view. And I probably would not have my neon green cat in there. But then you just save that as a PowerPoint presentation enabled template or PowerPoint template. So that way if you save that as a template, then that way it's always going to be available to use and show up in your template options. And so that way I could name this Astro whatever, and this could be my master slide that would always have the name for that master. So again, this is a really powerful tool, and you really can customize it as much as you want or as little as you want. So if you just wanted to take an existing theme and adjust the color slightly, you can do that. Or if you want to get really detailed, you can spend a lot of work on this. So it really just depends, again, on what your comfort level is with that, and then also kind of what your purpose is. So, what are you planning on doing with it, and going from there. Yes, Julia, hopefully that will save you a lot of time. The nice thing too is you can go to an existing one that you've already edited, and you can turn that one into a template as well. So that way, if you've already done some work on things, you can create the template based off what you've already changed for some stuff. It's also useful sometimes to go ahead and create a template and then share that with your students. So if you want them to all have a consistent presentation template, you can do that as well. And then that way the students aren't having to create that themselves. But you can have one maybe that is specifically formatted for whatever task or assignment that you're wanting them to complete. So that can be very helpful. All right. Yes, so again, it's just going underneath View, going to the Slide Master, and then just editing from there. So this is just a little video option I showed to kind of show the different resources. So you can format that background, as was mentioned. You can change the colors. You can do gradients if you want to. Backgrounds. There's all kinds of really good options that you have for kind of fiddling with this. All right, so let's go into the next section then. And that's going to be how to use animations and how to use transitions. All right. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with animations. This is an example of a morph transition using also with animations. So I kind of created a little bit of a timeline slide. And I just have this where it's just going through and kind of animating some kind of timeline that I want to illustrate. So transitions are generally used to move from one slide to the next during the presentation. You can control the speed of them, the sound, the look, and you can also add in 3D models with Morph. So Morph is just something that's been added recently as a transition to PowerPoint, where it will automatically animate some things for you to move them across different areas from one slide transition to the next. On the other hand, animations allow you to add, move, or remove objects on your slide. So you can control different things from that. So you can control the speed. You can control the order that they're going to be shown in. And then you can also go ahead and create a trigger. So you can either have where they're self-triggered, so it's going to do it itself, or where you trigger it with a click. And you can also control the duration of how long it's on the screen. So there are some different 3D models that you can go ahead and import that are automatically created for you, or there are available ones online. So you can easily add some different models or things like that if you wanted to add representations and make it with some animations that might be helpful for teaching or for presentations. Now I will mention that adding a lot of animations can definitely make your slides larger in size for when you're saving, so that it's something to remember if you are having where your students are needing to download frequently, that will then increase the slide size. All right, so let's go ahead and add in some of this. So it's your turn. We're going to start with a very basic shape. We're just going to start with like a triangle, a circle, or I probably wouldn't do circle, but triangle or a square or something. So we're going to go ahead and then you create that shape. Then you're going to duplicate the slide with that shape on it. And then in that second slide, move that shape anywhere else on the page. You can rotate it. You can change the size or the dimensions. And then that's going to allow you afterwards to apply the morph transition. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to insert a shape. Just got a big triangle. I'm just going to delete these boxes. You don't have to, though. All right, and then I'm just going to right-click and duplicate that slide. And I'm going to move it. I'm going to change the size, and I'm going to rotate it. So now once I've done that, I'm going to select transitions, and I want to morph from one to the next. So I'm going to put morph on both of those. And so now if I look at that, when I go to the next one, it's going to then morph in between. And let me showcase that. So now when I go to slideshow and have the action, it's automatically going to move the size. It's going to rotate that item and put it in the place where I wanted it. So again, using the morph transition or adding different animations. So if I go under animations, you can see here where you can add animations in for with starting it. Or if you insert a 3D model, and I will say with 3D models, it can take a while for them to load. But I could insert ones like space, so you could do different planets. And then that just takes a while, so I'll probably cancel that. But that way you can really kind of start working with different animations, and then this is all something that can be moved around and worked with. So you can kind of just rotate it to wherever you want. So this is a really neat feature to use if you have those models where you can then have, if I start it off at one place and then rotate it, then it'll automatically rotate it during the transition between slides. And so you can go ahead and extend that as much as you want by doing the duration options. So you can do on mouse click or automatically, and then that way it'll go ahead and make those changes for you. So you can get really detailed information when you're doing transitions and when you're doing animations. You don't have to use these. So it really depends, again, on what kind of information you're sharing and how you want to display things. But these are features that are available that can be fairly strong or helpful, again, depending on what you're trying to do. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you do have options to a lot of very strong options for transitions or animations that can be brought into for your presentation. Once again, make sure that they do fit your actual presentation. You don't want to just add them for the sake of making the moon turn, which is fun to do, not necessarily necessary for that. All right, so I'm going to grab the screen back. Yes, so that's some of the stuff that you can do, again, with animations or with transitions. Now you can add a lot of other things too. So in this case, I'm going to be talking a little bit about adding audio and video as well. Now I do want to add, when you're adding audio and video, and this also applies, of course, then to images as well, you do want to think about copyright. So you want to ask yourself who owns it. And sometimes this is why it's good if you are doing audio or video stuff where you know you don't have access or you don't have copyright information. Sometimes it's better to just link to it and let people go to it themselves as opposed to actually sharing it within your slides. Especially if you are recording it or doing other things like that, because that way, in case people share it or it gets out somewhere else, that could be something you need to worry about. So it is just good to ask yourself kind of who does own this information and go from there. So here's just an example. I went ahead and if you go underneath Insert, you have the video, audio, and the screen recording options. So you can add video from either online video like YouTube. You can also add video that you've recorded on your computer or that you have available on your computer. Just the same for audio. You can do audio on PC or record audio. You can also do screen recording. And then you also have the option to do something called dictate, which is available then on, if you go on from the Home tab. And dictate also, in addition to letting you dictate it in English, it should let you do it as well in multiple other languages. So if you are working with something that is multilingual, dictate will actually let you dictate that and create that for different languages. I will also mention if you're using the online version of Word for Office 365, they also allow you for upload or dictate from recording. So if you do want to create a copy or a print version of whatever you're talking about, you can then create an audio recording of that. Now that can take up to 10 minutes or so sometimes for it to finish going through whatever the recording is and making that into text, but that is an option available then if you do want to work on that dictating, for going ahead and having a text copy of whatever audio you're working on. I will also mention that you do have sometimes where, just like any other program where it's word to text, there will often be ones where it's not interpreting the information correctly. So just keep that in mind, that you may need to go back and kind of double check and edit a little bit of it. So some of that for the ADA requirements, I believe you are still supposed to consider doing ADA with the text for that. And you are correct that it may not meet the text guidelines for that. I like doing it sometimes if I know I'm going to be working with a lot of international students or other things like that. So sometimes I do still like having that transcript on the side. The other thing that you can also do sometimes is if you go for your presentation, there is also a subtitles toggle that you can do. Again, this is not always perfect, but it's something that you can then work with. And that way, if you are doing a screen recording of your PowerPoint presentation, then this is something you can have built in. I would recommend testing it out beforehand, but this is something that can come in handy sometimes when you are recording a video. And especially test any very complicated words, or there's sometimes words that I just never pronounce correctly. So keep that in mind if you are doing any of this with the subtitles for possibly recording, especially for ADA compliance. You'll notice that that's at 88 instead of ADA. So hit and miss. Yes, if you do have a video in your presentation and you record your presentation, it will record the video playing. That is correct. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well at the end when you're creating a video. But if you are doing a screen recording of your PowerPoint slides and you have built-in videos, you just need to make sure that it plays properly. And then I always recommend going back and looking at that recording afterwards, but it will record your presentation and the video that plays. The other thing too, and I think I actually talked about this later, so I wanted to get ahead of myself. But yeah, so there are a lot of options of screen recording or the video and audio options. All right, so I'm just going to do insert video. So I can just have an insert a video, and this is just a video of a cat purring, so it's nothing fancy. You can also add transitions and animations to videos. So I've done before where if I have multiple videos I want to go through, I might have where it starts off small, and then I'll have where it'll expand itself when I click or if I go to the next slide. So you can add that with the options for when you're doing things like that. You can also change the feedback sequence. You can have, if you click on playback, where either you have to click to start or it'll start automatically. So you do have some different options when you are working within videos. So dictate is essentially going to create text for your words. So if I dictate in English and I hit the dictate, then it's going to record everything that I'm saying, and then it's going to have that available once I'm done. And it takes a little while sometimes for it to process. But it should then have that dictation option available. The other thing too with PowerPoint, if you are worried about accessibility, is they do have down at the bottom an accessibility investigate. So it'll actually track different accessibility issues as you're working. And you can do things like where it's missing slide titles, looking for captions and audio video. So it'll actually track some of that information for you. So that is something to keep in mind if it's available. So that's kind of a nice feature that they've added semi-recently, is you can go ahead and work with the compatibility there. Okay, so then I want to talk about a few just more general tips too. And one of the things, especially if you're working with audio or video and doing it yourself, you also want to remember that proper preparation prevents poor performance. So make sure you're getting comfy with your materials. Make sure that when you are going to present this, you're very familiar and you've gone through everything. So that can really help then when you're doing your presentation to make sure that you're not stumbling over certain words or other things like that. It's also really important to remember that proper posture powers confidence. So if you're slouching, if you're leaning all over, doing other things like that, it can actually really affect your voice. And also, especially if you're recording the video of yourself as well. So just make sure that you do try to have proper posture, either when you're recording things or also, of course, if you are in front of people and doing the presentation. So those are just a few things to keep in mind then as you're either recording, like I said, recording, or if you're just doing it in person. All right. Now you can also make your own video from scratch using PowerPoint, and there's kind of two different main ways that you can do this. So one we briefly touched on, which is screen recordings. And then you can also create a video using timings. And so timings would just use with existing slides where you're just going to insert all the timings on them, and then you would insert like little audio segments. So if I go back into here and I create the timings for that, so that could be with transitions. So the transition is just going to say, when is this going to advance to the next slide? So you can set up durations, and then you can say, I want you to automatically go to the next slide after a certain amount of time. So you can do this really well. And then, of course, if you do where you're doing insert screen recordings, you can also go ahead and change some different options there. So I'm just going to select, I want all my screen done. And I'm going to record this presentation. So you can have where it's going to record the pointer or not. And then you can just record it through here. You can also set it up to record as you're doing the slideshow. Let's cancel. So if you're doing the slideshow, you can also then save it from the slideshow. So if I'm going underneath slideshow here, you can do record slideshow. And then you would start from either the beginning or the current slide. And then this lets you narrate the slides as you go along. And it will automatically add in timings then based off the slides that you're doing. Now, if you are using this method, it's really important to make sure that you are doing certain things like stopping in between when you're doing your slides. Because if you don't, then it's going to have where it's not going to recognize, sorry, the wrong one. It's not going to recognize that you've been talking because it does take time to transition between slides. So if you are doing record slideshow, let me just show what it looks like for that. Swap presenter view. Then it's going to have the options within that. And I don't think it's going to let me do it because I'm doing too many slideshows. But it'll then let you change that option for allowing you to go ahead and start and stop the recordings. You can add different timings. You can re-record and do other things like that. Yes, so record slideshow, it's going to record your voice as you're explaining things. And of course, it's not really letting me show this very well, I think because I'm doing another recording option. And they don't like you recording multiple things at once, so it's going to throw some errors. But when you click on record slideshow, it should show you things where you can go ahead and you can also showcase your video if you want to. So in that case, you would have a little image icon of your video. So if you want people to see you as you're also talking, you can record your audio as you explain things. Other things like that will be built in. And once you do create that recorded slideshow, it'll then add a little icon that will be the audio that you can go ahead and edit that if you want to. Just like with videos, if I want to for video format, I can do some, or playback, I can do some editing. So I can change the duration. I can actually cut and paste a little bit off the ends for audio or video if I want to make this smaller. So maybe if I coughed a lot before I started the recording, but I don't want to lose that information, I can trim it. So you have a lot of options still within that, and those will then show up for that. And then when you're done, you'd go under File, and you're going to do Save As, File Export, and create a video. And then this will let you then create the video based off those timings. So in this case, I'm going to use the recorded timings that would be there. Since I don't have that recorded, it won't have those options here. But you can have those narrations options available there. The other thing that you can choose is you can choose how high of a quality this will display in for the video. I normally recommend keeping it either at full or just HD. If you do the Ultra HD, that can be very large sizes for the students to have to download or for them to go ahead and have for when they're watching. So that can sometimes be a problem if you do have longer sessions that you're recording, where their file sizes will increase incrementally because of the quality. Now, of course, that will be larger, so you can notice that the display is 3840 by 2160. So you can record those, but I would just kind of play with the sizes and make sure that they're going to be accessible for your students with that. But yes, so you can go ahead and again do under slideshow, and you can record the slideshow, or you can insert with the screen recording and do it that way. If you do record slideshow, I would highly recommend, if there are things not in your PowerPoint that you want to highlight within a browser or other things like that, to actually insert screen recordings in. So I could create a new slide, insert a screen recording, and then when I do my slideshow recording, it will still have that video you can play, but that way you're not having to stop it and try to figure out how to add in those screen recordings later. So that is something good to think about, again, when you're recording your presentation and creating a video. Again, don't forget to smile as you're doing that. So smiling can change how your voice is going to sound, and especially if you are adding your video in as well when you're doing the video recordings. Make sure that you are periodically smiling. Don't look too serious. It's fine to smile for that. So a few more things that I want to mention is one thing that's good to do is to prepare for the worst. So think about what's the worst that could possibly happen. I mean, I've gone to a class before and the computer's been down, or you've gone and you can't make a presentation, or maybe all of a sudden Blackboard Collaborate doesn't work. I did a session one time and no one could get into the session because it just kept on kicking everybody out. So just think about what could happen, what's the worst, and then kind of plan ahead. So what kind of connection do your students have is good to think of too. So are they going to be able to download the videos? Are they going to be able to view the things that you're posting? So just think about that a little bit and try to plan different options, again, depending on the audience. It's also good as you're looking at the presentation to kind of think about what do you really want people to get out of it. So what are their takeaways? What, if anything, stood out? And then just what are you hoping that they, at a minimum, remember from your presentation? So that's something really good, and then just making sure that you're really emphasizing that. Sometimes it's good to repeat it a couple times, things like that for your presentation, just to make sure they are kind of getting the message that you're really wanting them to get. So I know I've talked a lot, but I want to make sure that if anyone has any questions, there is some time for questions. So if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about previously, just general things about PowerPoint or presenting effectiveness, please go ahead and add those in the chat, or just raise your hand and we can use the mics. All right, so the insert poll, sure, yeah. So we're going to go underneath File, Options, Add-ins, and then you can manage different add-ins that are available. So you can look and see what kind of things are available for that. And I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay. So for Poll Everywhere specifically, here's kind of a thing for walking through that one. So you'll note here that there are some different ones, like I've added in EndNote ones, I've added in Adobe PDF Creator. So if you go to add them, you normally have to have them then downloaded on your computer, or you have to have them where you can access them. There should be some ones where you can access them from online. I'm just forgetting where you need to go under, which one you need to go under, because it's been a little while since I've added them, sorry. But you have different options, and it should walk you through then for those ones. And if you go underneath the PowerPoint add-in options, so there's a lot of different support that you can access, and there's all kinds. And I would double check sometimes the different options that are available. before adding in something. You want to make sure that you kind of trust it a little bit. And you will need to enable your macros for those. But normally you'll download an add-in, or you can save that, and then you would save that into your add-in list, and then that would be available for them adding in. So sorry, there's a few extra steps that I forgot to mention earlier. So, but that should hopefully allow people to add in then that Poll Everywhere app. And there are other polling ones, so in case you don't like Poll Everywhere, all you have to do really is search for PowerPoint, add-ins, and then polling, and you should come up with a whole bunch of different lists. So you don't have to necessarily use Poll Everywhere, it's just one that I've mentioned before. Yes, they should be able to take the poll in real time, that's correct. And I mean, of course, the other option too is you can always then do a screen grab and do it from your browser. So if you have a different program, like maybe you prefer Kahoot, maybe you prefer SurveyMonkey, maybe for different other resources for polling or for other things, you don't necessarily have to do everything in PowerPoint. You can go ahead and kind of go to some of the other ones, as long as they have the website and the numbers, and you have the availability for that poll or survey or whatever you're doing to be available for at any time and not just during a presentation. So you do have some different sources or different options available for that. So there are some different things you can look at. Okay, if it's a recorded presentation, what I would normally recommend doing then for the forms is you won't be able to have where they'll click on the forms because of the recorded presentation, but they will be able to go through. So you can actually then share the link is what I would normally recommend doing if it's a recorded presentation for forms. So you would just create a link from the ones that you've done and have that maybe in the presentation. Forms really works best if you're sharing just the slide deck. So if I wanted to, like I normally have when I'm doing my classes where I would share the recording and then I would also share the slide deck. Or if I just wanted to do a slide deck of something else. And then that way I would have them follow along through the slide deck as it's going through the recording. And then we would do that. No, I understand what you're trying to mean. So you wouldn't necessarily be doing that with forms. There are some other things like the Poll Everywhere or like some other resources you can kind of add in or have associated with it. That would work then for doing some of those buttons. But unfortunately, the forms is really only going to work with the saved one and not if they're doing a recorded session, because they won't actually be able to click on the recording, if that makes sense. So for that one, you would want to kind of add in the Poll Everywhere or some other feature just to make that available. Well, once again, too, I'm fairly easy to find. I'm the only Christina in the library. I'm the only Schwabel in the state. So go ahead and contact me if you do have any further questions or if you just get stuck. And CTE will be making this video available. So don't hesitate to go ahead and refer back to that as well. So thank you again all for coming. I appreciate your taking your time. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.